Well, thank you everybody for coming. So I'm sure you guys, if you don't know me, I'm Chris Dombrowski, and I'll be hosting today's journal club. It was two papers selected by Chris Laser, who's been doing a wonderful job with our journal club. So he's set the bar pretty high. But before we get started, two things I want to talk about is, in the past, Chris has been running all the journal clubs. So he's been getting the papers together, presenting to us all, and then kind of leading the discussion. But he can't keep doing that forever. So we really want to get this to be for the members, by the members. So if anybody has any papers they want to talk about, or we have a list of papers on the website, you can select from there or propose your own. But we are looking for volunteers, and as of right now, I don't have anybody for the September journal club. So be thinking about that. And it looks like it'll be 9/20 will be the next journal club. Okay, so the two papers for tonight are, well, I think one of the original, maybe the original on the Sun Dagger. So Anna Sofer's paper from 1979, and then we have kind of a rebuttal from almost 10 years later from Carlson. And I think what I wanted to do tonight was, it's a little bit complicated site, so I wanted to just sort of work through how it works and what it is, and then we can talk about what was said in each of the papers. And I'm by far not an expert on this site, so if anybody has any thoughts, feel free to jump in anytime. It's not meant to be, a lecture on my end. It's more of just sort of leading a discussion. So, so the Sun Dagger is a solstice marker, sun calendar, we'll call it, on Fajada Butte, which is in Chaco Canyon. And if you guys haven't been there, Fajada Butte's about 400 feet tall, and it's kind of in the valley, in the Chaco Valley, and it's a very prominent feature. So I mean, it's something that just sort of sticks out in the valley. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the Sun Dagger is right up here, right in that little niche on that top, on the top of the butte there. And if you're at the park, they have, at least they used to, some telescopes set up that you can actually kind of see the panels from the ground. So geometry's a little bit hard to get on. And I just wanted to say a couple of things. I was surprised how few good pictures there are of this site. I wanted to pull together a bunch of great pictures. I figured we could do a lot, and just scouring the internet, I was surprised how few there really are. And then models. So I know Anna was involved in, I believe, an NSF grant where they actually drug LiDAR equipment to the top of the butte, and they actually scanned this whole thing. So this gray image here you see is a 3D model that a very, very precise 3D model that they built. And it was an exhibit, I think, in University of New Mexico, and then I think at OU. But it's since, I don't know where it is. I can't find the model, and I can't find the data. So in the chat, I dropped two links to Sketchfab, where there are two models that I'm suspecting are from drones because of the way they're built. I don't know, can you see? Let me see. Can you see a model, or are you still seeing the slides?
Slides.
Wow.
Okay. Here we go. You see that?
There you go.
Yeah. So there's two models, and I dropped the link in the chat so you guys can play with them. But I think this really helps you get a sense of the geometry. So these are the three slabs that we're going to be talking about. And part of the debates are whether they're natural or whether they were placed there. And then unfortunately on this model, and this is why I say it's probably a drone, you see there's no definition behind the slab. So I think somebody flew this up here. You guys can take a look at that. Here we go. So here's one of the better pictures I could find of the slabs. And like I said, so part of the debate is whether they were placed and worked, or whether they're just naturally had fallen there, and if they had naturally fallen, if they were adjusted at all. So here's kind of a side-on view, and then here's what it looks like from the top. So there's three. It's thought to have been one rock that kind of split into layers, and it's just a sandstone layer. So there's distinct strata in it that can separate on naturally. And you can kind of see through this slit here. You start to see the glyphs. So when we get a little bit closer, they're laying up against the wall, and on this face, there's the spiral glyph on this back wall. And then in the bottom corner here, you can see the initial light effect. So is that kind of clear to everybody? The geometry? 3 slabs laying up against the wall?
Yeah.
The petroglyph? Okay.
I've got 2 3D models up on the web, and they were not done with a drone. They were done at ground level.
Okay.
I just put up the link for one of them. I'll try and find the other one.
That would be perfect. And can you get behind the?
Probably not. These pictures were taken in the early 1980s, and we didn't have a modeling in mind at the time.
Oh, I think this might be your model then.
Yeah, I've got another one I can put up.
Okay.
Nothing sums up positivity more than the viral fight of Trinite and Zinzer. Here's part of Oz's video that started all of
Okay. We'll come back to the model in a second. I just want to get through how it works. So the light effects come from the sun coming from east to west, and then the changing effects of the season comes from the altitude of the sun as it drops down. So it's kind of a unique marker in that sense, where it's a very discrete light coming down at high sun angles. And the Anna's paper, she makes note of that being she claims it to be one of the only ones. I'm not sure if that holds. I mean, if there's others known today, but as a minor point that she made. And then here's the actual effect. So this is the summer solstice, and it starts off at the top of the spiral. And as time moves on, it's just this nice straight beam of light that kind of cuts right through it as it drops down. And I think I got this up. Let's see. I did find one movie of this, so let's see. Can you guys see that? Is that playing?
No,
Pardon?
it is, if he's showing the movie, it is not playing.
Oh, okay. Well, I did also put the link to that YouTube. Typically just sort of showing the slabs, and then and there's a nice time lapse of that summer solstice, what you're seeing here in these pictures. Let me get back to this. Oh, yeah, okay. I just got an error here. Hold on. Okay, so come on. So the movie just shows this effect on the summer solstice as a light dagger going through the spiral. And then on the winter solstice, you have the similar effect as the light comes in, and you end up with this bracketing on either side. So kind of the B and C lines. And then there's also a little bit of a light dagger on the upper spiral. So I think we should take a moment and talk about the glyph itself. So it's just this isolated glyph of these 2 spirals, and I believe it's 9.5 windings by Anna's count. And that
That's
becomes
correct.
relevant with the moon arguments. And then in Carlson's paper, he refers to this upper left glyph as a coiled snake, actually. And one thing I wanted to say about it is, having looked at a lot of spirals, the opening in the bottom right is, to me, unique. I mean, it's not just a pure spiral. There's something going on at the sort of the opening. It's kind of got two entrances, but that's not discussed or mentioned anywhere. Just something I've noticed. And this is from Carlson's paper, just trying to summarizing the seasonal calendar that Anna Sinclair proposed, and it's just go from the solstice to the equinox and then back around. So you end up with this very compelling solar marker, solar calendar. Okay, and this is from another Anna Sinclair paper that Carlson mentions, and I didn't post that paper, unfortunately. I didn't realize till I was reading it late that Anna also published in the same same publication that the Carlson paper's in, and it was the preceding paper. So he references this chart, which is just another summary. The top panel just summarizes the summer and winter solstices, but then it also gets a little bit into the possibility of just being a sunrise marker when the sun's low. So you still have a very prominent effect of the sun on this glyph through the panels during sunrise on those dates. But this also gets into the kind of lunar argument, whether there's something going on there.
Chris, I'm not sure we're seeing, I don't think you're advancing the slides. I think you're not.
Okay.
I'm still on figure 4.2.
Okay. 4.2. How about now?
No, we're still on figure 4.2.
That is interesting.
There you go. There's a.
Must have gotten. Okay, so you saw 4.2. So this is the summary from Carlson, which just reiterates that. And then the last panel I'm going to show here is, again, a summary of the solstice and winter markers with the daggers, but then also showing the horizon effect. So as the sun rises, you just have kind of full illumination, but it gets blocked as the season goes on going through. And this is where some of the lunar arguments get brought in. So that's the Sun Dagger. So the questions I had from this that I think that we should all discuss is the first two is the slabs, were they moved, and were they worked, meaning were they intentionally put there, or were they a natural feature that were then exploited? And I think that's one of the major differences between the two papers. Anna Sofer in her paper claims that the stones had fallen I think several meters from where they are and had to then been moved. And she, I think, also claims that they were possibly shaped to produce this effect. And then I think then she implies that then they were constructed together, the glyph and the stones, or the stones were placed in the glyph. And in Carlson's paper, if I got it correct, is more arguing that through some geological work that he references, that the stones pretty much fell in place. Not to say that they weren't tweaked, maybe moved just a little bit, but they pretty much are where they fell, and that there's no indication of shoring up or any construction, anything similar to the skills that are demonstrated in a Chaco Canyon. So it wasn't built up in any way. If they were moved at all, they're pretty natural in that sense.
Yeah,
And then he argues.
I posted a link to the paper that Evelyn and I wrote on the geology, and that was our argument. So if you want to look at the paper, which was written in the early 80s, it's in the chat.
Okay. Well, you want to share your argument?
Well, I could share the paper, but you can look at it. Our argument is that it's a natural rock fall.
Okay.
And it slid into its current position, and then it was taken advantage of, but that it's not a construct.
Okay.
Slabs
And then the glyph would have been added after the rocks.
Yes.
Okay.
That's our argument.
So
I'm sorry, Robert, is it your opinion that it fell as one rock and then split on impact?
We think it must have slid down on a surface that's no longer there and probably split on impact. Yeah. I suggest you look at our paper and see if you think it's plausible, but that's what we think happened.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say with this pairing of papers after I read into them is there's been a lot of work that's, that we're talking about the very first paper. So there were a lot of, assumptions and claims made. And then there's a lot of work that substantiated that going forward. And even Carlson's paper is kind of rebukes some of the things in Anna's paper, but even this is an older piece of work. So I think there's a lot of consensus now. So I don't want to set it up as this open debate. It's just, but it is interesting to kind of look at the history of it as it goes through.
Hey, Chris, this is Brian Bates. I did a lot of work on this site as well as Robert did. In fact, I want to thank him for some of his leadership on this. And in order to move those rocks, you're going to have very strong rope, and you're going to need a pulley system. There is no evidence whatsoever that there was some sort of pulley system, some sort of mechanical advantage that these people could have used. And so Andy and Odell and I looked at this very carefully, and we came to the same conclusion as John Carlson and Robert Mark, Evelyn Bello, and even others, that the rocks most likely fell into place. They split, and when they split, then those rocks still could have been maneuvered slightly, or the edges may have been worked. But because of erosion over time, it's very, very difficult to determine whether or not those edges were actually worked or if they've just naturally eroded.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that was one of the critical critiques in Carlson's paper, is whether the stones are worked or not. And he makes a strong argument that the inner edges are sharpened as they were, and the outer edges are worn. But to your point, it's really hard to say. I mean, it's sandstone, right? So it's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Hey, Chris, this is Ron.
Mhm.
Hey, in our study of calendar sites, it appears as though the majority, like 99%, are sort of natural features in the rock that make the shadows.
Right.
I've seen a few constructed gnomons, but very, very few. In fact, it's always puzzled me, since they understood. I mean, they had construction techniques. They were aware of these light and shadow. Why didn't they make, a nice standing obelisk, right? Projecting up against the wall? But we just don't find those. We just don't find very many constructed gnomons, and so they're very, very few.
Right.
Ron, the answer to that is that they're not from Scotland.
Could be.
But I would tend to agree with what you just said, Ron, is that most of the time the shadow line or the sun line is there, and they take advantage of it. I have a real hard time thinking that they had to tweak these stones to do what. I mean, they had to have seen the Sun Dagger as such before they did the spirals. And why would they adjust it? But because that would suggest that they were trying to create the dagger, and I don't think that they would know how to create the dagger by adjusting the rock. I think it's just natural there, and it's really, all the extraneous stuff. Because if you look at Carlson's 5.3, the summer solstice interaction is 18 minutes, and I believe that to be primary to what they first saw, what she first saw, but what the Anastasia saw. The secondary on the right of that seasonal calendar, the winter solstice, is a 49-minute interaction, and based on my matrix that I've been working on, that is just a secondary effect where these two daggers are, alongside, adjacent to the edges. Because if somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there some indication that this spiral was a certain size at one point, and then it looks like there was actually a secondary effort to expand it to large or enlarge it? Is that, am I not remembering correctly?
No, that's not what happened. It appears that sometime after its discovery, one of the slabs moved, probably because of all the attention it was getting. But it was not prehistorically. That happened in the early 80s.
And it was.
I'm talking about the spiral being. I'm talking about the spiral being actually extended to meet out to the winter. I think somewhere in one of these papers, there's a suggestion that the main spiral was not created at all at once.
In the paper, and I think Anna mentions this also, there are some additional faint lines that are superimposed on the spiral. And I think that's the only kind of a possible modification I'm aware of.
So,
Okay.
Ron, if I could respond to that, those lines, if it's the line that's coming out of the center down towards the bottom left, then that marks the lunar minimum. And if it's the groove that comes along the far left-hand side, then that marks the lunar maximum. The northern.
Right.
Okay. And so Andy Odell and I did measurements on that. Rolf Sinclair did them as well. In fact, we were doing them at the same time. And we concur with his measurements that indeed those grooves do align with the northern maximum and the northern minimum lunar excursion.
And
So
those are,
Brian, a question for you and maybe others that have studied this site is, are there other markings superimposed over the glyphs? One of the things that we find around here, especially on some of the basalt rocks, is we find a whole series of very carefully etched lines superimposed over the glyphs, and they've been repatinated, so they've been there for a while, almost as if they're marking the progression of maybe a shadow or something like that. Was there anything like that on the Fajada?
Nothing that I'm aware of. There are other glyphs up there, and in fact, Anna Safair claims that one of the glyphs that is to the, what would it be? It would be to the western side of the three slabs themselves, actually marks like not Chaco, Pueblo Bonito. I find that to be a very hard stretch, but I'm not aware of any petroglyphs that are made over top of what exists there now. I would defer to Robert, Mark, and Evelyn Billow because they are much more in tune with researching that aspect than I.
Well, but not recently. It's been so long since I saw it. I don't dare say that there, may or may not be really fine incised lines that we're missing, because we're currently documenting in Washington a extremely incredibly fine lined incised entire area of boulders, and you cannot see them except at certain light angles and certain times of the day, and maybe even certain times of the year. So I haven't been up there enough, and even Bob's been up more than me, and I doubt that you had any either, unless we could look at old pictures that were really high resolution.
We were looking at the geology, not the details of the petroglyphs, so we did not notice those.
Yeah, I didn't either when I was up there with Rolf Sinclair.
so Brian, is there any indication that those subtle lines are man-made? Are they made, or are they?
Which lines are you speaking of?
The depressions you're talking about with the moon shadow.
The northern maximum, northern minimum, those are very shallow. And I will admit that I said to Rolf Sinclair, why did you create all this hoopla about the lunar excursion? He says, Brian, I understand you can't see them. They were noticed by photography, is a story that I've heard. Now, I'd have to go back and confirm that with Anna Safair and Rolf Sinclair. But I think they were first noticed by photography, because photography will pick up things that the human eye doesn't. So I think that they were actually human made after they had created the spiral itself.
So after the spiral.
Yes.
Okay.
It would make sense. One of the questions I had about the spiral itself is how much space is between the slabs and the rock surface that the spiral is on?
And Greg, if you're asking me, there's enough room for me to get in there, lie down, and my elbows would easily touch the rock on one side and the wall on the other. So
One of the
there's not a
questions I
whole lot
have
of room.
is that from people I know that have been up there doing laser scanning of the interior area, they wondered if there was enough space between the slabs and the rock face itself to wield a rock hammer.
That would take, I think it took somebody not as tall as I am. And I stand 6'4", folks. But I think if you had, you know, a small chisel and a rock to hammer it, that yes, you could have done it.
Okay.
I agree.
Go ahead.
The distance brings up another argument not an argument, but a question I have. And that is the precision with which the dates are marked. You know, the casting length, you know, is probably only what, maybe 3 feet or so, which does not lead, you know, necessarily to, you know, something that you can, the daily marks on it are going to be very, very small. And so has anybody done a precision analysis of that site?
What do you mean
Yes.
precision?
And I don't remember the reference, but I believe it was, Greg, you'll have to help me out here. It was our technical conference in Phoenix in 1997,
No, 2010.
2010. See, I don't even know what year it was.
I was there. I should remember the talk.
Well, it was a pretty technical talk, and I believe it's in the proceedings. But I don't
Okay.
remember who did it. And I may even have the wrong conference, Ron.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, it's always struck me that, you know, it's illustrated with the dagger of light centered on the glyph. And so that dagger has some width. And so in the calendars that I've studied, I've always looked at the point of light, you know, when does the point pierce the center? Because the light comes to a nice point, and now you can very finely resolve as little as 1/4 of an inch per day, and maybe even less than that. And it seems like that's, you know, I think the dagger moves down vertically. And so when the dagger hits the center, it seems like that would be the moment of precision to look at, not when it's halfway through. And so I'm just curious if somebody had ever done a study like that. The same with the equinox glyphs. She shows the equinox glyphs with the little light dagger centered on the glyph, not really pointing to the center of the glyph.
And of course, hey, the light and shadow is going across that. So someone would have to have been studying it over time, in my opinion. And that they also would have already, if they're living there, they already have their ceremonies, they already have particular dates of times of year that are important to them. And so they'd be noticing when that particular day was, and maybe even, you know, did a peck or whatever to start it, to keep track. And if they were doing it, I'm you know, trying to figure out how did they even start to place it on there to begin with. And that's sort of my impression of what,
So,
go ahead.
Evelyn, your comments remind me that there's actually a habitation site up on top of Fajada Butte. And so if you're standing in front of the 3 slab site, you would go to your left, that's your to the west, and then back to the north. But there actually is a habitation site up there, and they had found charcoal, they had found other objects of people who were not necessarily living year round, but certainly were there for periods of time. And the assumption is that those were largely probably priests that were then watching the movement of this light shadow line through the petroglyph over periods of time.
One of the important things about those sites up on top that are actually habitation sites up on Fajada Butte, if my memory serves me right, are actually Mesa Verde reoccupation dated. They weren't Chaco in time period dated. They were reoccupation, Mesa Verde reoccupation dates. The pottery that was found up there.
I didn't know that, Greg. Thanks for sharing that.
So Greg, the ceramics that were found were Mesa Verde black on white. Now, does that coincide with the end of Mesa Verde?
Yeah, yeah, it depends on what part of Mesa. Yeah, Mesa Verde black on white was in the very late, more into the post Chacoan period, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's possible also that was traded down, but generally the analysis of those sites put it as Mesa Verde reoccupation.
Was the
Even
charcoal
if, even
dated?
if it was traded down, it still dates. I mean, the ceramic is dated at least, right?
Yeah. The paint styles on it. Yeah.
Hey, I want to interrupt for a minute because I see Vondell is lighting up as if he's going to share. And I would just like to give Vondell a chance to share with us if he would like to do so.
Well, what do you want me to share? I've been thinking here all over the country, you find split boulders, boulder slabs that have fallen and split. They're so common. So just on the surface, there's so many of these things. And this one, I was up there before Anna was there, not thinking in these terms, but I just did see the spirals back there, and there's quite a bit of room in there to operate. And there's just so many questions in all of this that we can't answer.
See the photos in our paper. The last link in the chat.
Which photo you want to show?
Well, there are just a whole series of these very similar looking slabs scattered around the canyon. So it's definitely not unique.
No, I've seen, just on the canyon floor driving around, you can see slabs falling over just in that same kind of arrangement. Yeah. So it does happen naturally and frequently.
And those are all in Chaco Canyon? Yeah.
They're all over the place. They're out here in southern Utah. Lots of big boulder slabs that have fallen down and very typically split into several vertical, pieces.
Boulders.
Has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now.
See them in Arizona all along. I-40 going over to New Mexico, and we've stopped at several of those places. We'll look behind, and many times there might be petroglyphs, but they haven't necessarily been studied. But not always, It's a nice shady spot too. That's the other thing I think of personally. I'd go in there to do it rather than out in the hot sun and the desert and sandstone.
So had anyone worked with the LiDAR program that was up there? I want to say that was early 2000s. It would be interesting to see if that data is available. I mean, it must be, somebody must have it, because a lot of these questions, the depth of the workings of the petroglyph and these depressions for the lunar things, that might be represented in the LiDAR data. Because you're saying a lot of this comes out of photography, just having the light just right, but the LiDAR data, you would have a full textured model.
The impression there is a very good 3D model, but it's housed in the museum.
That's my impression. So the original
It's not
model,
online, but you'd have to actually physically go there.
I think so. Poking around, I found some web pages. It looked like there was an app or something that would interact, but the plugins are all dead. So, and these are dating back to 2000, 10. That, I mean, they're just old.
So a comment on the model. Let me see, it's been a while since I chatted with Ann about this, but I think when they did the scan and they reconstructed the three-dimensional model, they actually observed that the stones had shifted.
Right.
And the light has shifted due to all the foot traffic up there. And so they were able in their model to then take the stones and readjust them
Digitally.
to make them look what they looked like originally. Yeah.
So, Ron, that's accurate because I was up there before they had shifted. So I'm going to include my good friend Robert, Mark, and Evelyn Billow in this. We're partly responsible because we've been up there. And indeed, it was due to the traffic of people going up and looking at it, even though the Park Service was pretty selective as to who they would let go up there. So that's actually an artifact of our research. So,
Well, I don't think that's fair. There are some early photographs. There was a contact sheet when we were studying what had happened, showing somebody lifting a rock that had been in front, sort of against the slab, lifting it out.
really?
Yes. The Park Service never published our analysis of what had happened up there. They formed a committee and I was on it to try and analyze what had happened. And we think that very early on, people were moving things away from the base.
Early on, what time period?
Well, the contact sheet we were looking at was from Anna's crew.
Really?
So it looks to me like it was happening when they
In the
were first
70s.
up there studying the site, that they were moving rocks around.
Hmm.
And it is on a slope. It doesn't surprise me at all that there's downward slope movement there.
You know, what surprises me though is if it could have sat there for 1,000 years and then move during the first few years after it was discovered. That bothers me.
I will mention that I have found stone gnomons, constructed stone gnomons that have been toppled. And I know this because we had photographs prior to and after. I've also found constructed gnomons that are just right on the very hairy edge of eroding and falling off. And so there's one site, every time I go back, I think, you know, the gnomon's going to be gone, but so far it's still there. And so, a lot of these sites are susceptible to natural erosion also. There's one thing, Chris, that I think I disagree with Carlson in his paper, and that is the lack of evidence of understanding the moon cycle. You know, I think we all sort of agree about the construction, or I should say the lack of construction. But it'd be good to hear some of the comments that people have about, you know, he just disavows anything to do with the lunar standstills.
Right. And it sounds like Brian's the local expert and Mark. One thing I just wanted to say is, I mean, these are dated papers, so there's clearly more work that's been done. So yeah, I was hoping we'd talk a little bit more about the lunar cycles. So, you know, the ongoing debate is whether they knew about the standstills. So if the major and minor standstills are encoded in this shrine, and that's evidence that they would. So Brian, what do you, if you don't mind?
Well, what I did was I went back and I looked at a lot of the stories of ancestral Puebloan people, and I'm trying to think of the name of the fellow who assembled a lot of those. He himself is Puebloan. It'll come to me 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
But at any rate, if you look at the stories from Puebloan people, they talk a lot about the moon. And so I think the moon is very, very important. And in fact, it is a natural time marking mechanism. The patterning is very clear. It's 29 and a half days per odd calendar. So it was probably 30 days for most of the ancestral people, but it's very consistent. And in fact, there's good evidence that a lot of biological functions, including our humans, women's menstrual cycle, coincide with that. And so I think that
I'm here for another 20
Fred?
minutes.
Okay, no problem.
Fred, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you.
Don't talk. That's good.
So at any rate, I think culturally, there is strong evidence across Puebloan peoples that they use the moon as their primary time mechanism, though they may have also used the sun to tell them which moon they were dealing with. At least that's my interpretation.
But Brian, if
Yes, sir.
if I might take a contrary position, the moon is of course very, very important. But I think what we're talking about is specific moon rise and then the 18.6 year cycle. I mean, Zilek talks about how even the historical Pueblo people were concerned with, an agricultural season, and they weren't building chronologies, and they wouldn't have thought in such a long time scale, is his opinion. I know that ethnographically, there's only 3 sites on the globe that would have a strong ethnographic support for a lunar alignment, and that would be a temple to Thoth in Egypt, the temple of Ur to the moon god, and a temple at Petra. And then, of course, Kim makes a strong argument for Chimney Rock.
Yep.
But I'm not sure that there's any ethnographic evidence that anybody in the Americas was looking at a moon rise. Now I know William Romaine definitely argued differently for the Hopewell area, and some of his ideas have been adopted by Pocketot at Cahokia.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think, especially a minimum, a lunar minimum. I mean, I find it hard to believe how anybody would see that rising on the horizon and say that it was remarkable in any way. The lunar minimum, lunar maximum, I can understand. I'm not sure if I believe it, but I understand it. I understand the argument. I don't think we can ever get, tough to get to the bottom of that one, but a lunar minimum, I just don't think I could,
I would, Chris, I would look at, there is very almost zero evidence for the lunar minimum, yes. And I have
agree.
Chimney Rock for the lunar maximum, possibly Fajada Butte. And there is, it was architecturally documented at Mesa Verde, Sun Temple. That definitely happens. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. The question is why? And that's maybe something that in social changes gets lost in the past, or it's sacred. And it's also a matter, I think, of documenting more sites, looking for this when we document sites. Because I know that there's other sites in Mesa Verde, Cliff Dwellings, that I know they documented it also, but it's just never been documented properly and published properly. So I think it's out there. The more we look, and we're going to find it, the more we look at it, the more we document it, we'll see that it was observed. The question we'll probably never be able to answer is why.
Yeah, so
Greg, I think that ties back to the culture. That ties back to the fact that a lot of native peoples don't want to share their
Sacred knowledge. Yes.
their sacred knowledge, and that's exactly what we're dealing with as we delve into their astronomy. We're asking to learn about their sacred knowledge.
Yeah, and you know, it's not for us to know. So it's
I
either
agree.
lost in the past or it's not for us to know.
Yeah, so a couple of comments on the subject. You know, Carlson makes the point in there that he doesn't accept it unless there is ethnographic evidence or cultural use of the date. But then he contradicts himself in there because he admits that this is probably marks the equinox. But of course, you know, there is no definitive equinox identification or a cultural use of that. So he sort of contradicts himself there. But a couple of things, I'd like to differentiate between knowledge and cultural use. My own personal opinion is I think it's inevitable that they knew about it, but I'm not aware of any cultural use surrounding it, except for the events at Chimney Rock. I mean, there was great preparation, ceremonial preparation ahead of that. But out at Hopi, there are ethnographic references to them watching the moonrise location over the surface. And so if you do that, it is inevitable, if you're doing this continuously, that you would see this 18.5-year cycle. It's inevitable.
If you find that source, I would love to see it.
Okay, there's another source, and that is at Isleta. They conducted a moon and solar ceremony in a house with a light port that would project on the floor. And so they made these observations throughout the years. And again, if you look at the full moon projection on the floor, it's inevitable that you would discover that it moves from month to month, and it moves over an 18.5-year cycle. Out at Zuni, there's a reference also, and this is an important reference at Zuni, and I don't think I've seen any archaeoastronomers use this, where there's a reference to a sun watcher observing the moonrise location versus the sunrise location. And in fact, he knows when the sun is moving north that it passes the moon. And so again, there's evidence of them making these observations. And so again, if somebody is watching this continuously, it's inevitable they would have to observe it and see it. Now, what they did with it, I don't think we know. There is one rock art site where we have a crescent moon that I believe will mark the northernmost lunar standstill. And so we'll be making those observations in the next couple years. But anyway, those are just some of the references that I've run across. The other thing too, I'd like to point out is and this is a study that I'm doing with the Coalescent Communities GIS database. Around 1275 was the peak of population in the Southwest, and people are still trying to get firm estimates of what those numbers are. But my calculations indicate that around the 1900s, when ethnographers were out there, the population was somewhere between 3 and 5% of the 1275 population. And so due to, after the Great Migration, the populations declined. In 1450, they collapsed all over the southern parts of New Mexico and Arizona. The northern portions of the Pueblo region hung on. And then, of course, when the Spanish got here, their populations depleted by 90%. And so ethnographers were out there trying to get the last bits of information, thinking these cultures were going to collapse, and many of them did. But it was just a very small remnant population. And my claim is that they would, without written records, even with their oral records, with the disruption that they had with the Great Migrations and the pandemics that the Spanish brought, there was a tremendous amount of knowledge that was lost over the centuries. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of those pieces that's lost.
May I share my screen? I found one of the images I was talking about.
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay.
Is that working? Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, these are from a contact sheet. And I think it's the late 70s, and I think it's one of Anna Sophia's group. And it looks to me like this piece which is being removed was over here someplace. So they were moving rocks around.
This is at the Sun Dagger site, the 3 slab site.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you, what can you see? You see?
Yeah, the one frame,
Says it Side by
2
side.
half frames.
We only see one frame, yeah.
You only see one frame. Let me
Although
see.
there's 3 stacked, but we can only really see the center one.
Right. Let me switch to another image. I've got to probably stop sharing and see what happens. Let me share another image. No, I don't have all the frames. Okay.
There we
I
go.
think that rock was sitting in here someplace. This cracks match.
I see.
So I don't know anything about this, except this was when we were doing our library studies at the visitor center there, and we were there in the mid 80s, but we think these pictures date back to the late 70s.
Right. And then looking at your model, I mean, those rocks don't all line up.
So that's why I think the area was disturbed very early on.
That's important to know, Robert. Thanks for sharing.
And it's also interesting what was being said about the Zuni, because I've spoken with some very important Zuni elders at the museum, and when we gave our show and we had astronomy as part of that, as you know, Brian, you were part of that too. But
Right.
Just recently they lost the last member of one of the particular, and I don't know if they call them moieties or whatever. And even though they're elders, they have their own specific secrets, and they don't even share it with the other. And he was sad because that data, that information was gone, and it was directional. He mentioned that there were north, south, east, and west groups, and one of the directions was now missing. And that's all I can tell you. That's all I remember from the conversation from a long time ago. But it's sad, of course, but I really do think they were, well, and he also said something about they were watching not just the position of the moon or the sun or the stars, they were looking at the plants, the animals, even the color of the grass. And they were combining all that knowledge to come up with a lot of this stuff was anticipatory for their ceremonies. So that's my 2 bits.
Ellen, I entirely agree with you, because I think that the native people do not get enough credit from our culture as being incredible observers. And I've been to a number of presentations in which the presenter says, and then through their belief in magic, this occurred or that occurred. And I've talked to some of those presenters and said, well, I think the information is actually coming through observing nature much more carefully than we as Anglos have observed it, or Euro-Americans. So I think that there is a tremendous amount of traditional knowledge that is being lost. And I know that one Hopi elder, I asked him if he could share about the stars. And I know that Hopi have their own star lore, and it only is spoken of during the Wuutsum ceremony in the, it's the cross quarter date of October and November. At any rate, he says, oh yeah, sometime. Oh, did you see that basketball game last night? And the message was, it's none of my business. It's their sacred knowledge. And unfortunately, it's being lost and has been lost. So I don't mean that as a conversation ending, by the way, folks.
Well, the last point that I wanted to say is more philosophy of science and paper writing. So I read Anna's paper first, and it was I think a very good site description, and for the most part, it's held up. I think there were some assumptions made and some conclusions that weren't substantiated, but Carlson's paper, I found a little negative. It seemed the rebuttal and the tone just seemed a little negative. And I think his points are valid and he made good points, but he could have done it in a nicer way. And so I just wanted to say, this is the kind of thing that instead of fostering collaboration and moving things forward, even though everything I think the paper's fine, that tone just sort of locks people out. And I'm guessing they probably don't get along. I don't know either one of them, but
I don't know why we need that in this kind of, we don't need.
Well, I totally agree. I think that there is room for respectfully disagreeing, and I want to thank everybody here because you all have done that. At the same time, I want to share that now I've lost my thought, that we have a history of confronting each other unnecessarily, and that is not something that we in the Society for Cultural Astronomy American Southwest, that is not what we are promoting. So with that, I'll be quiet.
I think that's well said.
Hey, Chris, I'd like to add something else to your comment. It's easy to just sit back and bash someone's work. I think what's more constructive is to go out and do work of your own and bring that work forward and let that work speak for itself. It may support it or it may refute it, but at least bring some new evidence to bear that people can look at to then make judgments, rather than just sit there and say, oh, it's easy to armchair quarterback. It's harder to go out and do research and develop a data and bring the data forward. And that's what I think we should be doing.
And that's very much what we did in the Sun Temple project that we did. We went out and tested Kim Melville's work and found that he was right in some things and not right in others.
Yeah, and those are very useful. That's useful data.
Yeah. Hey, if I could make a break here, I noticed that Sherilyn Morrow, and Sherilyn, you were at the Oxford 7 conference where we met, and it also says GB, and so I'm wondering if that's GB cornucopia. But I'd love to hear from Sherilyn and GB if it is GB cornucopia indeed. So I'd just like to make a little room for him if I may. Sherilyn.
Hi everyone. Yes, just sorry to lurk in late, but I sure like the last few minutes of what's been said, and love to see some of the faces here again. Yes, it was Oxford. That's great that you remember that, Brian. Appreciate that so much. And yes, GB does happen to be sitting next to me here. So yeah, go ahead, GB.
Yeah, it's good to see so many faces that I've seen before and have been out of touch with for the last several months. I expect to get back in touch with some of you again. like Brian and Greg and some of you folks.
Would you have something to say about the topic at hand?
Well, not much to say. I think that the last comment that I totally agreed with was it's easy to bash somebody's work. You don't have to bash it to notice that there's, lack of evidence for this or that, to take issue with some of the findings. You don't have to bash the work. Nobody gets it all right, and that's just the way it is.
I appreciate too what Greg was saying about, we've been doing some work at a sun watching site that Kim pioneered the investigation of, and in a white Western sense anyway. And I had the same experience, some stuff was really right on and some stuff was a little off. And so then what do? You don't bash people, you just get that data out there, right?
Build upon it. Yep. And correct.
Yeah, build on it.
In the past.
That's how it works, and we want people to have the courage to put out models. This isn't an exact science, is it? No, this is a blend of physical and social science and cultural exploration. So it's something that I feel like we need to, it's courageous to put something out there that can't be absolutely proven, right? And we need to be able to push off of one another's models and keep exploring. And if we do that, maybe we'll get somewhere. People don't want to be afraid that they'll be bashed, so they don't put the information that they may have, obtained out there because they're afraid of being bashed.
Well, Cheryl Lynn, it's good to hear from you again. I just have a quick question. Are you still with in Chicago, the Adler Planetarium?
No, I have collaborators at the Adler, but I've never been there. These days, I'm NASA funded to direct the outreach program embedded in the NASA Punch mission, polarimeter to unify the corona and heliosphere. It's a small explorer mission, and we're enacting an outreach theme of ancient and modern sun watching, and that has, which was deliberately designed to make me go to Chaco and study sun watching sites, and make the connection between that sun watching, even as NASA does it, is a natural extension of what human beings have been doing for a long time. In watching the sky. And so making the cultural connection there, we have some really extraordinary cross-cultural partners that we're talking to, but not really we're trying to help youth and families in Native America. And it's really a collaboration, but it's not an ethnography, right? We're not like trying to pump the Native culture for their understanding. We're just trying to collaborate to be of value to youth and families and help people connect to NASA heliophysics, quite culturally and personally, instead of making that quite as esoteric as it can be. And so we've been working at the Acoma Pueblo in particular this last spring, working with an 8th grade science class there. It's been a real joy, because we're learning so much from those young people about, I'll just, you all know about making holes between your fingers so you can do a solar projection, right? Everybody knows about that, right? Maybe not. We have to show. All right, here we go. Ready? Okay, here we go. I'm gonna put it on the video. Here we go.
There you are.
So you know about doing this. Hello, everyone. And so, you make the pinhole projections through your hands, right? And all the videos tell you to kind of do it this way and get the sun to shine through the back of your hands. And so we were doing that with these 8th graders, and maybe 2 people were succeeding to get the actual circles between your hands. And then this young woman just went, and she turned her palms to the sun as she turned her hands over. And I don't know if this is meaningful to you, but this changes all these people who do eclipse outreach. It changes everything, right? that you put your palms up. And she did that, and suddenly 80%, many more of her classmates were able to project little pinhole circular projections through the square holes through the hands. And so that's an example of a way in which we're listening to the youth instead of just pushing out content to them, and offering some cultural astronomical understanding that the white Western world has had, and letting our cultural partner chime in as he sees fit, right? And that's proving to be a really excellent patient model, where new understanding comes to light in its own time, in its own way, and it's not forced.
Carolyn, I'm going to go one more step. That sounds like it would make a great article, perhaps co-authored with your friend there, GB, but for the Society for Cultural Astronomy newsletter. And because you're working in a cross-cultural situation in which you're also using the Anglo science. And that's exactly how I got into this field when I was working at Rough Rock.
Yeah, Brian.
Listening to the elders and then trying to bring some of that information back and going, why am I trying to bring it back? Let's bring the elders into the classroom. And it
Well,
works.
exactly. And thank you for saying that, Brian. It's a very powerful model to go in as a NASA representing lady and then have our cultural partner at our side. It reduces the tension that the young people feel about having to choose between NASA science and their culture and their families. So here we have our culture partner teaching. He's actually projecting sunspots through his binoculars and then showing them a NASA website. And I'm talking about horizon calendars at Casa Rinconada, and we're not even doing the traditional roles where, the cultural guy is talking about the culture and the NASA, woman is talking about the NASA science. We're mixing it up. He's a math and physics educator, a STEM educator as well, as a man of his culture. And so it's a beautiful collaboration, and we are learning. Not only are we reaching out, but we're creating pathways where that culture can reach out to the rest of the world and say whatever it is they want to say through our planetarium films or other products. So it's really relaxed, and we'll learn what we learn, but it's neat. You all will appreciate that doing our humble little outreach project is actually pushing the frontiers of knowledge and cultural astronomy. So kind of enjoying that piece of it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And please keep in touch. In fact, I just sent you a message in the chat.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I do remember the talk you gave at Oxford 7 in Flagstaff. It was very influential for moving this field's, standard of excellence forward. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that conference, it was a bit of a chore putting Oxford 7 together, but it came off well. So
yeah, way to go.
Thank you.
GB and everybody, please send us your your current contact information so we can keep in touch.
I'll do that for everyone. We don't mind hearing from this gang, right?
No, these are okay. These people are all right.
So Sherry Lynn, a lot of what you're talking about is reminding me of something that I've been thinking about reading these papers, this concept of two-eyed seeing, which Robin Kimmer writes about, and Native Sky Watchers and Nat Lee. That's a really important thing, and that's just very much what you're doing, kind of incorporating these two worlds. And I was thinking about that as I was reading the Carlson paper in particular. It felt so not like this two-eyed seeing. It just felt so factual and scientific and just rejecting a lot without really allowing for there to be more nuance, more exploration. So that was something that I wanted to bring up with this as well.
Totally agree with that. And I would encourage this group to read that paper. It hails from the Northeast, the indigenous people there and an indigenous leader, and it's called Two-Eyed Seeing, and there's an application of that paper to an environmental science course and how to bring in indigenous science as well as the Western approach. I think it's a really healthy paper, and you're right, Chloe. We are endeavoring, of course, for the Punch outreach effort to be very consistent with that approach. Yeah.
And that's by Hatcher?
We'll have to look up the reference. I don't know if we have the same one, Chloe. Maybe we can both put that paper out there. We use it in our advisory board. It's a very cross-cultural advisory board. And we basically encourage everyone to, not only relax into a two-eyed seeing, but also looking for opportunity for new solutions to things that may emerge from the contact between Indigenous and white Western worldview. What new ideas can emerge, not just seeing in two ways, but if we can find a way to stay in proximity and in contact with one another, we really can involve new ways of seeing things that combine the best of both. That's kind of one of the philosophical approaches that I've been putting out there as well with our collaborators. We have no target audiences, by the way. You see, we don't target people for impact. And this is the NASA culture. This is the federal government funding culture. And I had a big argument with our principal investigator about, I'm not going to put the term target audience. I'm not targeting anybody. I want my Native American partners to be able to read this proposal and not laugh and giggle at us for having target audiences. So we have collaborators that we aim to benefit and hope to learn from. And that puts us on, equal ground, and in a way that really makes a difference in terms of the quality and joy in the collaboration.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks you for your contact information. I'll get it updated in our database.
And there you go. It's an update for both of us, really. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's about time.
Yep, we want you back.
We're here.
All right. So, yeah, we're about an hour and 20 into this. So,
Yeah. So I think I just want to reiterate, this has been great. This is exactly what we want. Go over some papers and have good discussions. But I am looking for volunteers. So Robert, Mark, I know you're pushing a lot of papers tonight, so it's kind of like volunteering. But if anybody has anything they want to talk about or any particular papers, maybe the two-eyed seeing is something we could go over. Anybody who wants to present that'd be great. So just contact me and we can set it up.
Chris, I second your motion to have Robert, Mark, and Evelyn Billow as one of our presenters.
Well, you'll have to wait a bit. We leave in 2 days for Ireland, and maybe I give a.
How often are you meeting now, you all?
We've been doing once a month, so it's trying to be the third Tuesdays. So the next one will be 9/20.
Nice, equinox time.
Right
Are
around
you
there.
going to Newgrange? Are you going to Newgrange?
Yes.
Of course you are, yes.
Well, actually, there's been a whole lot of new
let's sign off so I can
petroglyphs
stop the
in
recording.
Cary.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Thank you.
There's going to be a side trip to see petroglyphs down in Cary. And some of them they think have astronomy. So I'm real curious what they're going to show. So
Nice.
who knows? Yeah. Oh, it's going to be so much fun. I've never been to Ireland. I'm really excited.
And President, I'm not sure, I don't know you, President, but I really like how you turned the conversation to a little bit of a critique of the tone in those historical papers, and that actually made me lean forward and want to listen in further. And I appreciate the comment about, hey, that's not what we're about. And
Oh, good. I appreciate that. I come from a bunch of different multidisciplinary disciplines, and some work together and some don't. And I've seen it when people work together and are polite and courteous, so much more gets done. So
right on, sir. Yeah.
The last meeting that I was at with the group was what Brian put together, and others too, of course, with all of the Native American input in that meeting. That was extraordinary.
2019, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that was extraordinary.
Thank you. And a lot of credit to Greg, to Chris, to Ray Williamson, to yourself, GB, you were there. Rick Allen, there was a lot of work amongst our group. It wasn't just me. So
I want to tell a story though. When GB told me about what was it, was it the Pecos conference? You showed me a picture of, you said the first archaeoastronomy conference you ever went to,
Yeah.
and your impression about being there.
Well, it was an Oxford conference held at St. John's. I forget the year, back in the 90s.
1996.
Yes, because that's where I met Greg and you.
Yep, same here.
Yeah. Well, the thing I remember most about that was all of the infighting.
Right off the bat.
Yeah,
All
and so
Sinclair
much
got
time
into it.
seemed to be wasted on how we're going to do this, and it's like let's hear the papers, let the people speak for themselves, and let things fall where they may, as opposed to, oh, this one's the proper one, this one isn't. We have to do it this way. It seemed to be arguments that were talk about polarization.
Yeah,
And
it was frankly a bit of a turnoff.
yeah, that was how it impressed me. And then I went to a rock art conference, and it was exactly the opposite, where everybody got a chance to be heard. If somebody said something foolish, okay, it was out there. There it is. It doesn't have to be spotlighted, and people don't have to be blamed.
One thing I'd like to just seed, I know we're out of time and we tuned in late, but one thing I've been thinking about, and maybe Brian and you and others have had this thought before as educators, but it seems to me that archaeoastronomy, it could be a valuable platform for some citizen exploration, right? Citizen science. A lot of citizen science, a lot of people do it anyway out of almost a hobbyist kind of thing. And there's a challenge in professionalizing it in the archaeology community, but it's like there is room for people roaming around, seeing and finding things and documenting those things, even if that's not an authoritative, investigation that somebody who does cultural astronomy for a living would do.
But they see too many things.
Involved.
Is that what it is?
In the rock art community, we have people who see things all the time, and they're not being careful about what they're looking at.
Yeah.
But that is actually one of the drives of our upcoming workshop, to put in a plug for it, is to coming up in early October. You'll see some announcements going out shortly to kind of help to work towards standardizing the field documentation methods. And so that trained volunteers can go out and collect data that is meaningful to cultural resource managers and the descendant communities.
That's great, Greg. I mean, that's the kind of thing. It's like the GLOBE protocols, that it can actually be useful in research if there's certain kind of protocol, that you can follow. Yeah. So that definitely go ahead.
Let me reinforce. This is Rick, and I just wanted to. I was thinking the same thing Greg just said. Is that there's a tremendous resource out there, and volunteers are eager and ready. They're already site stewards. They're already in place. And I think what we found is Crow Canyon is also kind of on this track, is to try to give them useful things that they can use. We'd like to up the game of documentation so that we have statistically significant amounts of data that we just don't have right now. And it would take us 100 years to go out and re-examine, all the sites and try to do that. We need that help to do that. So that's I love your comments. I also am from ASU. We've got a lot of NASA projects, and I know.
You guys are famous. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that ASU also, or I'm in NASA also. They also fund 2IC, in fact. So Nancy Maryboy and David McGay, they get NASA funding for kind of running those programs. So that link is really strong, and it's purposeful. It's not accidental. So
they're starting to call ASU the NASA Center of the Southwest now, right? It's so much NASA funding.
I'd love to hear that, because yes, we're actually involved in some way in 22 projects right now. So
wow, yeah, that's
a lot.
And you got Steve Semkin down there, I think, too.
Yeah, do you know Steve? Yep.
Oh my gosh, I've worked with Steve also.
Yeah, I'll tell him
river trips.
I'll tell him we met. And
absolutely, yeah. Please say hello. Absolutely.
May I just say another word about documentation, just so I know this is really wrong, and what I'm observing, reading from these papers, is that I don't see anywhere where I would just love to see, and you know, maybe Robert and I would love to see like what direction does the rock art face, and I don't see it in either of these faces. Right. I mean, that seems like a really simple thing, is like, you know, what is the facing direction? Because then it sort of starts to put the geometry and everything kind of together. And so as far as a little site description, a rock art that faces, you know, 170 degrees as opposed to one that faces 270 degrees has totally different exposure. And that's a super easy thing to say. And I don't see it in these papers.
Yes, I agree. We, in the documentation we do, we always do facing. And I was shocked when, now I forget, it was maybe Cedar Mesa, not Cedar Mesa, it was in where's Baby Canyon Pueblo, in that area. That group was going to do just one card documents for their rock art. And I can understand you want to keep something small, but they left off facing. And
yeah,
I
well,
put it in. I was like, that's one of the most important things to me. So yes, you're right on.
Yeah, so anyway, so this is back to the technical conference that we're talking about in October. It's those really, you know, super simple things that are, you know, maybe it's almost too obvious to people just overlook it, you know, but that is a statistically significant piece of information. And, anyway, so that's kind of my 2 bits there. And then the other thing that I noticed that came to me out of sort of like the hearing of this stuff is that this isn't a Sun Dagger site. This is a 2 dagger site, right? The fact that there are 2 is monstrously significant. The fact that there are 3 rocks and they cause 2 phenomenon is, to me, makes this thing far more significant than a Sun Dagger. And then if you just take a look at the geometry, the width of those 2 daggers at winter solstice is the width of the rock, number 2. Right? And if that width also is sort of halved the distance between solstice and an equinox, that's actually sort of also geometrically significant. And so I don't, this paper doesn't necessarily talk to the significance that there are. This is a site that takes advantage of 2 daggers, not 1.
Rick, I want to follow up real quick in that our conference, well, it's a technical session, will be in Phoenix, October 7th, 8th, and 9th, with a possible field trips on the 10th. So we would love to have everyone here. I see David and Chloe. So, you know, I hope that everyone here could attend. With that, I'm going to have to move on, but I do want to say thank you to everyone. And take care of yourselves, and please keep in touch with us.
Nice to see everybody. That was great. Nice to meet everybody.
I hate to duck out, but I got other things I got to get to. So
Good night, everybody. Good night,
everybody.
Yeah, it was great.
Take care.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Everybody.
Good moment.